Live coverage from NBC News today. Untold number of casualties, human casualties today after 4 planes hijacked in the United States and the World Trade Center. 2 planes crashed into them, and both towers have since collapsed.
We're monitoring several sources. We're going to take you now briefly to coverage from MSNBC. Let's go there live.
As we watch once again one of those American planes plunging directly into the World Trade Center. Greg, Chris?
And of course, subsequently, both of the towers at the World Trade Center collapsed. Teresa Ward, who is on the phone with us now, was in the second building, the second tower, when the first one collapsed. Thank you for being with us at this difficult time. Tell us where you were, what you saw and heard. Can you hear us, Teresa Ward? We seem to...
Peter has me on hold for CNBC.
Hi, Teresa?
Yes, hi.
Hi, this is Chris Jansing at MSNBC. I understand that you were in the second building when the first one collapsed, is that right?
I was in the second building when the plane hit One World Trade.
What can you tell us about what you saw and heard?
Well, I was at my desk, just, starting my day, and we felt a shudder. The entire building sort of shuddered. And at first we didn't really think, we sort of didn't know what happened, and we looked out the window and there was just debris and papers like a ticker tape parade falling from the sky. And immediately we just everybody calmly walked down the stairs, and a lot of people who had already been part of the original bombing were there with us, and we all calmly started exiting the building. And then we heard an announcement that there was an incident in one World Trade Center, but 2 World Trade Center were just fine, so we could return to our offices. So we then took the elevator down, and clearly that was not correct. And as soon as I got out of the building, I could see that there was a second explosion because there was just burning debris coming down, showering on us, and we had to run for cover. And then they rushed us back into the concourse, and we were able to exit the other way. And by the time I got up to Houston Street, I turned around and you could see that 2 World Trade Center was just a cloud of smoke.
So you had been told to go back to offices, but you made the decision to leave the building?
Yeah.
Obviously,
at that point, though, there was only an incident in one World Trade Center, and no one really knew what the incident was.
And you mentioned that you were with people who were there during the other attack, which you're talking about, the 1993 bombing.
Right.
What was the conversation? What were people saying? What were they doing as you were getting out of the building?
We were just calmly walking down the stairs, thinking, what the heck happened? Somebody said a plane hit the building. Another person said a bomb. We really had no clue what was happening. So everybody was relatively calm, having been through the experience of the first one, and there wasn't any smoke in the stairwells this time or anything like that. So the mood was very calm, and we were able to get out. But we got out right away as soon as we felt the shudder of the first explosion. So we were very, very fortunate.
You were, and thank you so much for calling us, and thanks so much. We're so glad that you are safe.
Make sure everyone and my friends and my family keep calling. I'm fine. Everybody's fine. Thank you very much.
Teresa expressing what certainly thousands of people are going through right now as they desperately try to reach family members who may have been in the World Trade Center or in that area this morning. The number of those certainly could number into the hundreds of thousands. And let me just tell you that the office of former President Gerald Ford has released a statement. Here it is. The United States must react strongly against this unconscionable terrorist attack. America should move aggressively to retaliate. Our governments must do everything possible to protect our citizens, echoing essentially the call of a former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, who said this is an act of war and America must take decisive action.
You are watching NBC News coverage on MSNBC. 2 planes shortly before 9 o'clock East Coast time crashed into the World Trade Center, collapsing both towers. The loss of life is no doubt catastrophic. The Pentagon also hit apparently by a suicide bomber who hijacked a commercial jetliner. We're following all of these terrorist attacks, and the question is, how could it have happened? Bill Arkin joins us now on the telephone. He is a military analyst and a consultant to MSNBC and NBC News. Sir, thank you for taking the time. The Rudman Hart Commission report earlier this year itemized the many ways the U.S. is, they said, totally unguarded, a sitting duck for a terrorist attack. The report said the U.S. would be hit, and hit very hard and very soon. Gerald Ford.
Today's TMJ4 again. In addition to the information you're seeing on the bottom of your screen, locally now we're just told that all Milwaukee County Circuit courts have been closed because of this terrorist attack on New York and Washington.
We should also say quickly that Milwaukee in the area is on a heightened state of alert. All military bases also on a heightened state of alert, and persons and property are being looked after by the Police Department of Milwaukee. Milwaukee Public Schools still in session at this hour, although parents can come to the school and pick up their children if they do so desire.
Let's get back now to coverage from NBC. Back to
Robert. We also have a report from the mayor of Cleveland, Michael White, saying that a Boeing 767 out of Boston made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns it may have a bomb on board, but no confirmation of
We
that.
also have, just because I have a personal friend who was flying from Kennedy to Los Angeles this morning, that plane was diverted to Kansas City. So apparently many planes that were en route to certain locations have made special emergency landings in the wake of this, and because of concerns that there may be more problems aboard more airplanes.
And what happens, unfortunately, in situations like this, if the terrorists themselves don't call in to say that there's a bomb on board, you have the twisted minds of other people who call in and say, well, by the way, there's a bomb on board that flight. So it is chaos in the skies for those flights that were already in the air. Other flights have been grounded. This country has been immobilized in terms of where its attention now is focused on New York City and Washington, D.C., the tragedies in Pittsburgh as well. No air travel, no financial markets. All national monuments are being evacuated. The president has been rushed back to Washington, D.C. The Pentagon has been attacked by an airliner, in effect, and on Capitol Hill, code red. The Speaker of the House was taken to a very secure area because he's third in line succession to the President of the United States. We are, as we have been saying this morning, in a state of war with terrorism.
And as a result, the Army has been placed at threat delta. That means that armed personnel will be guarding U.S. installations, not only here in the United States, but in other parts of the world. You're looking at the southern tip of Manhattan Island here in New York City, and for so many years we've come accustomed to seeing the World Trade Center standing there in the background behind the Empire State Building that you see in the foreground. Those two towers no longer stand after a terrorist attack this morning. NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
if we are, yes, I can, Matt. If there is a war against terrorism that started, rather ongoing right now, it started here at about 8:45 this morning. As you described, a big hole in the skyline at the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where the two World Trade Center towers have stood for the last 25 years, 110 stories high. They are no longer there. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those two planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He said that at one point he had roughly 10 alarms. That would equate to roughly 200 to 225 New York City firefighters who were in the building. This was after the crash, trying to rescue civilians who were in there. Now, earlier this morning on the Today Show, we spoke to the director of the World Trade Center. He said that at that hour of the morning, you could have upwards of 10,000 people in each of those towers. That would be 20,000 people total in each tower. The chief of safety, as I said, chief safety of the Fire Department of New York City, told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took
We're going to
place.
break away from live coverage from NBC News. The United States has suffered a terrorist attack of really catastrophic proportions this morning.
Mike Jacobs is in the newsroom now with more angles. Mike?
And Mike and Amy, we just want to update you on some local developments here. Let's begin out at the airport where the concourses have been evacuated. All flights across the country have been canceled, and flights that were in the air when this cancellation notice was issued have all been ordered to land at the nearest airport. Drivers are being told in and around the airport that they cannot stop on the roadways. All of this as a security precaution, not because of any threats that have been phoned in. A number of other buildings have also, this is a tower cam from Mitchell International Airport where the skies basically are clear down there. No airplanes have been taking off and only a few have been landing. Those are the aircraft that were presumably on the air, in the air at the time. This is videotape from inside Mitchell International Airport where, as you might well imagine, people are stranded. They are calling relatives on the phone. They are trying to find out what has happened and what will happen next. So Mitchell International all jammed up out there this morning, and we are told the evacuation of those concourses is now underway. Let's go downtown right now to the First Star building because I understand that a lot of people have evacuated there as well. Our Scott Friedman is standing by live with more information on that. Scott?
Well, Mike, I want to tell you first of all that the Milwaukee Police Department has shut Michigan Street between Cass and Van Buren. They're dealing with a potential security concern here right now. There is a truck belonging to a soda, or at least appears to belong to a soda vending company that is parked unattended underneath part of the structure where Michigan Street runs under the First Star Center. And police have blocked it off. One of the security officials from the building indicating to me that they're concerned, obviously, since this is an unattended vehicle beneath the building. We don't want to make this into a bigger deal than it is. Obviously, this may just be a vendor who is in the building doing business somewhere and has not made his way back to his truck. But they are checking on it right now, and as a precaution, the police have closed the street in the area. The building itself here is officially closed, and some of the firms that do business in the First Star Center had actually closed their operations today prior to the official closing of the building. Many of them because of the fact that the financial markets are closed, obviously, and just deciding to send employees home for the day. We talked with some of the workers coming out. They indicated to us there was no real panic as the message went around that the building is being closed. Sort of finished up the work they were doing and went about leaving the building in an orderly fashion. So again, we'll keep you posted on the situation here on Michigan Street where police have closed the street right now. Mike?
Thank you. Scott Friedman joining us live from downtown Milwaukee where the First Star building has now been officially closed. Also, the federal courthouse has been closed for the day, again as a security precaution. And we are told that all of the court buildings, rather the court offices in the safety building, criminal justice facility, and the courthouse have been closed. The buildings themselves remain open. However, Judge Michael Skorowski, the chief judge, has closed all of those offices again as a safety precaution. Mike and Amy, let's go back to you.
All right, thank you very much. Mike Jacobs reporting live in our newsroom. And of course, this story is continuing to unfold, and we're going to cover it from all angles for you.
Less than an hour ago, Milwaukee Mayor John Norquist had a news conference downtown. Here's some of his comments this morning.
This has been a day of horror. We share our sympathy with all the victims, and appropriately we feel anger toward those responsible. I want to reassure the people of Milwaukee that appropriate steps are being taken to protect life and property. I've spoken to Governor McCallum. We've had contact with the county executive's office. Here in Milwaukee, we rely on our public safety professionals, the members of the police and fire departments, and they have our trust and support. I know that the people in Milwaukee are feeling shock, fear, and grief today, and I ask everyone to unite and cooperate to ensure that we remain as safe as possible.
Mayor John Norquist a few minutes ago, and he's very correct. It's a day of horror.
We should also say that, as you can read at the bottom of your screen, the latest information concerning the schools in our area. Milwaukee Public Schools are still open, but parents can come and pick up their kids if they want. And also, Milwaukee under a heightened state of alert at this hour. Let's go back to NBC News now for the latest coverage.
Story is we know that many people were inevitably very seriously hurt or killed in these explosions. We have 4 aircraft full of people obviously, that were involved in these incidents, and an untold number of people who were in the World Trade Center at the time, in the surrounding area, and of course those individuals at the Pentagon as well.
And you can only hope that in the time between the actual collision, the planes hitting the towers, and the time it took for those buildings to collapse, that large numbers of people were able to get down the stairs. You'd have to assume that power in the building was probably disrupted. Elevators may not have been usable, that they were able to get down smoke-filled stairways to safety before both of those towers collapsed.
And as Pat Dawson just said, though, from the 60th floor up, it was very, very, very difficult. And there are 110 floors in the Twin Towers each in the World Trade Center. So you're talking about 50 floors, if his estimate is correct, of people. Now, the first explosion did occur at 8:42 in the morning. Some people might not have been at work yet, but many people here in New York, a workaholic town, get to work early, particularly those who are watching the markets, the overseas markets, and this is the financial center of the United States and, of course, of New York City as well.
Yeah, we have hesitated to use specific numbers, but Mayor Giuliani is saying it's a horrendous number of lives lost, and it could be in the thousands.
We want to go now to Ray Kelly, who's a former police commissioner here in New York City. Mr. Kelly, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, after the terrorist attack in 1993 on the World Trade Center, security was beefed up, but there's nothing that could have been done to prevent this kind of an attack, it seems.
No, it appears that nothing could be done, and of course, events in 1993 pale in comparison to this. This is a horrific event. As the mayor said, that appears to be thousands of casualties. And New York City emergency services, I believe, are the best in the world. But something like this, of course, could overwhelm any emergency service. But I think there is, I guess, some consolation to say that they are the best. And unfortunately, we don't know how many of them have been injured or perhaps killed.
Let me ask you a question about that, Ray. Is it true that the Center for New York Emergency is housed at the World Trade Center?
Yes, that is true. It was shifted there a few years ago. It was up on the one of the, I think about the 7th or 8th floor in one of those buildings. And again, in hindsight, perhaps that shouldn't have been done, but it was a state-of-the-art facility, no question about it.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that facility, if you could, Ray. I mean, what specifically is it designed to do?
It's designed to coordinate. You have 1,000 police officers. You have a fire department with the emergency service, EMS component of about 15,000 people. The purpose of that facility was to coordinate activities in the event of emergencies. And again, it had state-of-the-art communications equipment. And it's something that it's just unfortunate as to where it was located. But there are temporary headquarters. New York City has several of them, and mobile temporary headquarters that I'm sure they're operating out of now.
At the same time, it must be fairly chaotic without the use of that center to coordinate the efforts.
Well, I guess everything is chaotic right now, but the emergency vehicles, I think New York City has a lot of major events, and they coordinate most of those events outside of that center. That center has kind of an oversight responsibility for a lot of the events. The coordination is done on the scene. So they practice doing that
and Ray, I mean,
basis.
obviously the problem here is not only do police officers and law enforcement and rescue people have to respond to what's happened at the World Trade Center, but also a large number have to fan out to make sure that nothing occurs at other landmark buildings throughout the city.
That's true, and of course services have to be provided throughout the city. The normal police and fire services, the rest of the city, 320 square miles, have to be covered by emergency services. So it is indeed a tremendous challenge.
Ray, you've been in the middle of these kinds of episodes when you were the police commissioner in '93 during the attack. Your whole life has been dedicated to law enforcement and national security matters. But aren't you stunned by the magnitude of this attack and the complete surprise of it all?
Yes, and the complexity of it. I think we've relied for years on the relative lack of sophistication on the part of terrorist organizations. We've been very lucky, no question about it. We've had fairly good intelligence information, but then again, we knew nothing about the World Trade Center bombing before it happened. We had terrorists cross into our borders just before the millennium, December 14th of 1999. You know, you just you can't predict these things. I am surprised again at the level of coordination and sophistication of these attacks.
Ray, what kind of game plan is in place? Following the bombing of the World Trade Center, officials really sat up and took notice and knew that this kind of attack, perhaps not of this magnitude, but another terrorist attack was possible. So what kind of game plan was put in place?
Well, there's tremendous reliance on intelligence gathering. Certainly the FBI and CIA work more closely now than ever in communicating with each other and gathering information with the NSA. The FBI has set up counterterrorism task forces throughout the country. There's now, I believe, 23 of them. New York City was the first. And indeed, that was the entity that did the investigation of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. There's a lot more awareness now than there was in 1993, quite frankly, but obviously didn't prevent a terrible tragedy like this.
All right. Well, Ray Kelly, former New York Police Commissioner. Mr. Kelly, thanks very much for talking with us this morning. We're going to go now to Washington, to Campbell Brown, who is across the street from the White House, which, as we mentioned, has been evacuated. Campbell, what's the latest?
Well, Katie, we're not actually sure at the moment if where exactly the president is right now. He was in Florida this morning. We understand that he was told about the situation while he was in a holding room at the Booker Elementary School, where he was scheduled to do a reading event. He was was informed by his National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, by telephone while he was in that holding room of the first incident when the first plane crashed into the World Trade Center. He was actually reading to children when he heard about the second incident, and that was from Andy Card, his chief of staff, who whispered in the president's ear while he was reading to children. We are told by White House officials that he is planning to convene a national security meeting of all of his top advisors. We do know that National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and other key officials are now meeting in the Situation Room at the White House. As we mentioned, the rest of the White House has been evacuated. Only key personnel are allowed there. That meeting began about 9:39, we're told, this morning. Everyone else, again, evacuated. One of the questions, Katie, that we're asking right now, given that no one's been informed where the president is, and this is, of course, deliberate, is whether or not the White House will decide to put him on the so-called doomsday plane. This is a special plane designed for the president in the event of a nuclear attack, and it's far more sophisticated than Air Force One. It has the absolute most advanced electronics, equipment on board. He's able to communicate with anyone at any time and able to command the armed forces from this plane. They're able to refuel it mid-air, and they could essentially keep the president on this plane for an extended period of time. We don't know if that's an option that has been considered or something that they are looking at trying to do right now, or whether or not his plan is to come back here to the White House. The situation where we are now, though, it's fairly desolate because of the evacuation. They've actually pushed the White House staff, evacuated many of the buildings around here, and kept people several blocks away. We're at a hotel just about a block away where we do have a view, but again, only key personnel allowed in the White House at this time. Katie?
All right, Campbell Brown. Campbell, thank you very much for that update, and please keep us posted as things develop there.
Katie, joining us on the phone now is the governor of the state of New York, George Pataki. Governor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, we're looking at some just devastating pictures of Lower Manhattan, similar pictures at the Pentagon in Washington, and another incident in Pittsburgh. Just first of all, your reaction.
Well, it's just a horrible, horrible day. It's an attack upon America, an attack upon New York, and we have to respond longer term to make sure we protect ourselves. But right now, we have to deal with this crisis and try to help the people who are still trapped, still at risk. And we've mobilized our National Guard and statewide fire and emergency services teams, and we're communicating and working with the city, and everything we can do to try to provide support is being done.
After the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, I mean, was there a sense that some of the vulnerability had been eliminated through security measures? I mean, obviously no one can predict an airliner or two airliners crashing into these buildings, but was there some sense that security had been shored up?
You know, you do everything you can. You make sure that people don't get into the towers without being inspected. You make sure that people can't park under the towers, but you just can't be prepared for a plane to fly into one of the towers or two planes to fly into the towers. It's a horrible, horrible situation. Our heart goes out to all those whose families are at risk, and we're just going to do everything we can to respond and be supportive and helpful too.
Obviously, the loss of life is the primary concern right now in helping those who've been injured. But if you will, at least talk to me a little bit about the other impact of this building. This is, for example, as Tom and Katie and I have pointed out, the world financial center, the hub of finances in the world, if not at least here in the United States. What type of damage has been done to the financial infrastructure of this country?
The economic impact is something we can talk about as the days unfold. Right now, we still have to focus on making sure we save as many people as possible, help those who are injured, help with an orderly removal of the people who are leaving downtown and leaving the city. We're going to focus on that and be concerned about what may or may not be the economic consequences once the immediate crisis has passed.
All right, do you have plans to get down to this area?
Yes, I'm in the city, and I've been in touch with the mayor, and we're going to be continuing to do everything we can.
Governor, what about other emergency procedures for the city of New York in the next several days in terms of what's going to remain shut down and so on? A lot of people have this as a destination. A lot of people, millions of people live here.
Tom, right now we do have limited service out of the city. We have both the Metro North and Long Island Railroad running out. We have the George Washington Bridge open. The tunnels are shut for security reasons. We're not having traffic other than emergency traffic come into the city. And I think at this point it would be extremely unlikely that we're going to have many people coming into the city tomorrow. We're going to be continuing to try to deal with the horrendous situation downtown.
Thank you very much, Governor. I know it's been a long and difficult day, and it will go on for you and for all New Yorkers for a long, long time, unfortunately.
Well, our prayers are with the families and the people whose lives are still at risk.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
We want to go now, Matt, to Jim Miklashevsky, who is at the Pentagon. Jim, a lot of these flights were transcontinental flights, heavily loaded not only with passengers but with fuel.
That's right, Tom, and we just learned a few moments ago that the U.S. Navy is dispatching a couple of aircraft carriers from Norfolk, the JFK and the George Washington. One will be stationed off of New York. The other will be stationed in the Atlantic as close to Washington, D.C. as they can get. They'll be there to provide any possible military support that may be needed, including flying any kind of air cover should there be any additional warnings of any further terrorist attempted attacks. Now, as we stood here this morning, you can see the smoke is still billowing. The smoke just in the past few minutes has changed from black to white, a strong indication that they're throwing more water on the fire, as we saw from other vantage points. But the priority is to get the fire under control. A casualty count is impossible at this point, Tom. As you've seen from the earlier pictures, the plane opened a huge wide gash in the side of the building. We're being told between the 4th and the 5th corridors. It smashed through the E and D rings, and people who were in that area tell me that debris and parts of the plane actually penetrated deep all the way into the B ring. There are 5 rings, A through E, and it entered in the E ring, so it plowed through a number of the rings. The priority now, as I said, is accounting for the casualties. Medevac helicopters have been flying in and out. You hear the ambulances. Occasionally, we've even seen F-16s flying low routes around the Pentagon and over Washington, D.C., flying those CAPs or air patrol missions that are usually flown in combat. But to see 2 aircraft carriers moved in locations off the United States to provide air cover, Tom, I mean, that's the kind of thing you normally see in a war zone.
Mick, can you tell me, was that chosen randomly where they hit the Pentagon? Can you tell us what the function of those people in that particular ring was, where it was hit?
Well, it's interesting because a number of people, and this really wasn't sarcastic, but they said, well, they hit on the wrong side, because just the opposite side of the building, of course, you have the offices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. We were on that side of the building when the plane hit. We felt the building shake, the windows rattle, and looking outside immediately saw people on the run. There was pandemonium in the hallways. Now that section of the Pentagon, I thought at first when it was described to me that it may have hit in an area where some of the special operations offices are located. The Assistant Secretary for Special Operations is located near there, but the plane actually hit maybe about 60 to 70 feet to the right of that location. In that part of the building, there's it's very near a mall area, actually, where they have a shopping area for Pentagon employees. After all, there are 25 to 30,000 employees in there on any given day. And also in that part of the building, you had many Navy personnel, many Reserve personnel. I bumped into many Army personnel who are adjacent to that. They think everybody's all right. The Navy people I talked to said they still had a few people that were unaccounted for. But again, it's going to be impossible to tell exactly what the casualty count is in there until they get that fire under control.
Matt.
All right, Jim Mikoszewski outside the Pentagon, thanks very much. Joining us now is General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of all forces in the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, you've seen the footage, I'm sure, of the Pentagon and of southern Manhattan. We haven't seen much footage outside Pittsburgh. What are your thoughts this morning?
Well, you know, it's a very, very sad day for this country. It's really a sad day for the world as far as I'm concerned, and your heart goes out to all those families, and your prayers go out to all those people who lost their lives.
We are fighting a war now, it seems, a terrorist war here in this country. The question is, how do we go about fighting it, General?
Well, you know, that's one of those easy questions to ask and one of those very tough questions to answer. The deterrence against terrorists is almost impossible because these are people who could care less about their own survival. And normally deterrence is just says, you know, you hit me and we hit you back harder. And in this case, these people don't care whether they lose their lives or not, and therefore it makes it doubly tough to deter. The fact is that the world is getting smaller, and you know, terrorism has come to our shores because we have the ability to span oceans and great distances in a very short time.
Yeah, General, have you been able to talk to anyone at the Pentagon and get some updates on who may have been injured or lost?
No, I mean, the information that I've heard is basically what you all have, and that's it. You know, they didn't hit the very critical parts, and therefore maybe we don't have as many casualties there. But when you look at what happened at the World Trade Center and the number of casualties that they probably have there, it's just horrendous.
General Schwarzkopf, hi, it's Katie. I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously you've been in the military for a long, long time. Have you ever heard, or is this a method of destruction that the U.S. military was aware of and had concerns about, where they would actually, hijackers would use a plane as a flying bomb?
Well, Katie, you know, Tom Clancy wrote a book about just that. Several years ago, he wrote a book about a Japanese pilot crashing his 747 directly into the Capitol building and wiping out the national government. And so it's not something that's new. Obviously, what's kind of shocking is we thought we had good protection against hijacking of aircraft. And what's very apparent today is that something needs to be done about that if this many aircraft can be hijacked
Meaning
at the same time.
Meaning security at airports across the country, General?
Well, that and many other measures that could be taken, but I mean, it's kind of frightening when you consider the number of aircraft that were simultaneously hijacked and apparent with, I don't know, I can't say with apparent ease, I don't know, but it did in fact happen, and that's kind of frightening in itself.
Well, also, General Tom Brokaw here, the failure of intelligence here. I know it's always easy to say that at this point, but this is a very sophisticated and obviously widespread, complex operation that was planned. It was very tightly held in the most sophisticated way.
Yeah, Tom, but you and I both know that getting inside the intelligence, getting inside a terrorist group is probably the most difficult type of penetration that you can do. I mean, you've got to have somebody on the inside that can let you know what's going on, and that's not always the easiest thing to do in this type of terrorist organization.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll be back in touch with you throughout the day as we get more information. We'd love to get your oversight on all of this if we can.
Okay, Tom.
Well, let's go to Paul Bremer now, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who's the chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism. Mr. Ambassador, do we have any idea whatsoever who may be responsible for this?
Well, as you were just saying, we have a massive intelligence failure and a huge security failure that's going to have to be looked into. Analytically, there probably are 4 possible candidates. There's the Osama bin Laden al-Qaeda group that you've been talking about. There is the possibility of a Middle Eastern group such as Hezbollah or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad conducting an attack like this. And there are at least 2 states which at least are capable of such an attack, and that would be Iran and Iraq. So you have probably not more than 4 suspects.
How do we begin to find out who is responsible?
Well, the good news is that the hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking 1 is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in, they will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names. They will have had to have showed pieces of identity. There will be a trail that will lead back to hijackers at some point to the perpetrators. It may take some time, but we'll get there.
You're an expert on national security matters, Ambassador. How is this country going to have to change?
Well, I think it's one of those great challenges of fighting terrorism is to find the balance between being tempted to overreact, but also being absolutely certain, as the President said this morning, that people understand we're not going to take this sitting down. And I think once the perpetrators have been identified, and I believe they will be, the United States will have to retaliate with the full force of its military as hard as it possibly can. This is an act of war. It's an act of war that some have described as a domestic Pearl Harbor. In many ways, it's worse than Pearl Harbor. I think we will probably find the casualties are going to be higher than they were at Pearl Harbor. In Pearl Harbor, we knew immediately who had done it, and we therefore knew what the return address was. It was Japan. Here, we have higher casualties, less certainty as to where the attack came from, and therefore a more difficult response. But there must be a very strong military response to this act of war.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is a longtime colleague of Henry Kissinger and a veteran of national security affairs in this country.
This is Mike Goucher at the TMJ4 studios here in Milwaukee. We're going to continue monitoring NBC and MSNBC's coverage of today's terrorist attacks in America. And as we do that, we'll continue to bring you updates on what is happening here in the Milwaukee area. As you just saw on the bottom of your screen, Major League Baseball has canceled all of its games for tonight. Of course, the Brewers and the Cardinals were scheduled to play at Miller Park. That game has been canceled for tonight. We are joined on set now by Mike Santamoro, who was the FBI director here in the Milwaukee office from 1994 to 1998. Mike, as we continue to watch the events unfold today, let's talk about what is going on in Milwaukee right now. In light of this kind of attack today that we've seen around the country at various vantage points, what do you need to do immediately in Milwaukee?
Well, I think what I've heard through Chief Jones's and the mayor's news conference, they're securing the public buildings, they're beefing up security in areas where possible activity could take place. Since Oklahoma City and the first World Trade Center attack, there had been much more activity on the state, local, federal level to coordinate responses to attacks and also to deal with possible security actions in cities around the country. And I know Milwaukee, while I was with the FBI, working with the Milwaukee Police Department, working at the state agencies, to not only coordinate crisis management response from criminal or terrorist activity, but also to coordinate with emergency management groups both at the national and state level.
We see the strikes today at well-known buildings like the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Does Milwaukee have anything to really fear, or are we just as vulnerable to an attack as any of those more well-known sites?
I would say we should be vigilant because we have the potential to be as vulnerable as any other city. As you saw here, they took planes, they flew them where they wanted to, so there's no reason to say that a major airline couldn't be attacked out of Chicago or even out of Milwaukee. So good vigilance, good coordination, good cooperation between the law enforcement authorities, the various airlines, and any citizen who has a sense of something is unusual going on in their area needs to be responsive and get to the right authority and give them information. Because Milwaukee has that potential.
We're going to look at some video that is being fed into our building right now. This is the Milwaukee County Courthouse. You were talking a moment ago, Mike, about buildings that need to be evacuated. Obviously, this is the site of Justice in the Milwaukee area, one of the first buildings that would be evacuated. You were talking to me earlier in the newsroom, and as horrific as what has occurred today is, you made an interesting comment to me that you were not terribly shocked by what happened.
Well, unfortunately, there is enough rhetoric in the country by groups, bin Laden and other terrorist organizations, that still see the United States as the kind of the center of overseas activity against their principles, against the issues that they're interested in. And we've had incidents in this country before, the Olympic Park bombing, Oklahoma City, the World Trade Center before. We are a free and open society. People move around this country very easily. That's one of the great pleasures of living in this country. It also gives individuals criminal activity and terrorist activity the ability to move around also. Bin Laden, I think, is serious about trying to deal with the United States and attack the United States. He's done it overseas through the coal. He's done it through the embassy bombings in Africa. It was, in my opinion, it was just the next logical step. Not that it was, I don't believe, necessarily a major intelligence breakdown. These are sophisticated individuals who have very sophisticated networks to cause these kind of problems.
Mike, we're going to have you continue to sit out here with us today as we continue to bring you the latest developments from the Milwaukee area. Let's go into the newsroom now. Mike Jacobs for more information. Mike.
Mike, I just got off the phone with a captain for American Airlines who was on board a flight at O'Hare this morning, was just about ready to take off for Honolulu with a full load of people. They'd done everything but close the doors when the word came down that the FAA was shutting down all flights in the United States. As word got out through the airport and they eventually closed O'Hare, people were crying, they were in tears, and in fact there was one individual who was on that plane getting ready to take off for Hawaii, who was scheduled to be on that flight out of Boston this morning that subsequently crashed into the World Trade Center. A number of his friends were on that flight as well, and so he was extremely distraught. I spoke with this captain who lives in the Muskego area about the difficulty of commandeering a commercial airliner, and he said surprisingly and frighteningly it is not impossible for that type of thing to happen. They do have to get through security measures. Once they get into the cockpit, after the flight has taken off the ground, it is a relatively simple matter for someone who has a knowledge of flying to take the controls and direct it anywhere they want. So chilling comments from that American Airlines captain. Mike, back to you.
Mike, one other quick question on that. Did the pilot you talked to give any indication as to whether under any circumstance, for example, a gun is pointed at a pilot's head, that a pilot would fly an aircraft into a building like that, or does he believe that simply probably the pilot was no longer at the controls?
I think we didn't address that issue, but it is hard for me to imagine that he would fly that building or that plane into any kind of a building like that. I think we can presume that he had been taken out of the cockpit when that occurred.
All right, Mike Jacobs in the newsroom. He'll be continuing to bring us updates from there throughout the afternoon. You're watching NBC's coverage of this tragic day in America, as you see in the upper corner of your screen. We will continue to bring you updates locally throughout the day, and right now we'll rejoin NBC's coverage.
As you watched it fall, you thought...
You say you heard moans and groans. Did you see many of the injured around you as when the dust finally settled somewhat so that you could get out from under the car?
I was really kind of in shock and stumbled around for a little bit. You could that there were some people there. Everybody that was in the area was pretty affected. There was no emergency personnel helping anybody. Everybody that was there was in pretty bad shape at the moment. And as I started to wander farther and farther away from it, you could see more people coming. The cops and the firemen down there were just incredible, and you know, probably still are down there. So.
Obviously, it was a very frightening situation for you to be in. Did you have any idea? I mean, were they anticipating that because of the size of the hole in this building, that the whole building might come crashing down?
That wasn't my sense. I mean, it was obviously a terrible tragedy, but I felt that I was down in Oklahoma City about 3 hours after that blast happened, and I felt that things were beginning to ramp down. The emergency, obviously, there was a lot of tragedy going on, but I felt like the cops and the firemen were sort of beginning to get the situation under control. They were moving everybody back. By and large, the streets were cleared. There was a lot of emergency tape, and then when that started, we were all surprised. You can hear the voices saying, "Move back." I mean, there were a lot of people on the street.
Did you see the triage units at work and people being helped in the immediate vicinity? Because one of our first concerns when this happened was, what about the people who were outside the building who were in serious shape?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what was going on right in the immediate area. I assume there were, I hope there was no one around. As I said, I sort of stumbled away from it, and by the time I got 3 or 4 blocks away and the air cleared enough so that you could see, we were then all being pushed away. But, I mean, you could still see the remains of the plane crash from earlier that day. I mean, I shot some video of a huge airplane wheel. There were body parts, you know, all over West Street. I mean, it was insane down there.
Well, Christian, thanks so much for coming by. We're glad you're safe, of course, as well. Meanwhile, we're going to go back to Washington, where Bob Hager is standing by with more information. Bob.
Katie, the word now on these air crashes is there's 266 dead total. That's the rough addition at the moment in the hijacking of 4 planes. 2 of them were United airliners and 2 American airliners. 2 out of the 4, by the way, I'm getting my own voice coming back to me in my ear if somebody can help me on that. 2 of them were American, 2 United airliners. 2 of the 4 took off from Boston, 1 from Newark, 1 Washington, Dulles. 2 of those planes went into the World Trade Center, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania. There are 50 flights that are still in the air at this point. That is 50 commercial flights. The FAA has put what they call a ground hold on all flights in the U.S. So 50 of those flights are still in the air. That means that virtually everybody's landed at this point, and if there's any good news in any of this, they say that at the moment none of those planes appear to be hijacked or in trouble, and they're all very close to landing now, within 40 or 50 miles of an airport, their airport where they intend to land. So that should put them on the ground in the next half hour or so.
Bob, I just want to ask you, Bob, have many of those planes been diverted? In other words, are they reaching their destinations, or are they having emergency or premature landings elsewhere?
Yeah, there is nothing on that. They left it to the discretion of the pilots. They said if you want to go on to your landing, unless you're going to land in New York or Washington, go ahead to your landing if you want to, or you can divert if you choose to do that. So New York and Washington were the only 2 that were closed to incoming flights. I'm now told that there are 22 international flights still in the air. So we have 50 domestic commercial flights still in the air, 22 international flights still in the air. None of those believed to be in trouble, so that it's been more than 2 hours now since the last of these crashes, and hopefully if that word is correct from the FAA, then we've seen the last of this.
Bob,
Again,
I was just going to mention, you know, Peter Greenberg, our travel editor, had an interesting observation that perhaps the airlines that or planes that were chosen were because they had the most fuel. They were planning to travel across country most of those flights. Can you weigh in on that?
It is curious that 3 out of these 4 flights were bound for Los Angeles. They were 757s and 767s.
And the other to San Francisco.
Yeah, but none of them had to fly long distances because the 2 crashes in New York, let's see, those planes came from Boston, and from the second tower crash was, both of those flights were from Boston, the 2 crashes into the World Trade Center towers, and then the crash here in Washington into the Pentagon was a takeoff from Washington Dulles, so that's very close by, and the crash that happened in rural was a takeoff from Newark Airport, so that was not a terribly long distance.
Seb, I think what Katie's getting to, Bob, is that the planes were loaded with a lot of fuel because they were anticipating a long flight, and perhaps they were chosen because of the damage that fuel would do on impact.
Well, that could be a factor, yes, because you would imagine that a plane with a whole lot of fuel would make a lot bigger explosion than one that was had only a limited amount of fuel left.
All right, Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thank you very
Surely.
much. So now we know from Bob that there are 266 people dead as a result of those 4 planes. Obviously, this is an unspeakable tragedy for so many families throughout the country, not to mention all the lives lost here in New York City and at the Pentagon. But again, American Airlines Flight 11, American Airlines Flight 77, United Airlines Flight 175, and United Airlines Flight 93. Both American Airlines flights, I understand, were en route from Boston to Los Angeles. The United Airlines flight, 1 from Newark to San Francisco, and the second from Washington, D.C., actually from Dulles International Airport in Virginia to Los Angeles as well. If you need any information about a loved one on board, these are the following numbers you should call: 1-800-245-0999 or 1-800-932-8555. Those numbers, the first one for American Airlines, the second one for United.
And of course, what we don't know about those flights is what happened in the cockpit. That had to be the worst kind of terror, because they were able to force the plane 2 of the planes into the World Trade Center and then 1 into the Pentagon. Did they take over controls? Did they shoot the pilot and the co-pilot? Did they have a gun at their head and force them to do this? We don't know, and we don't know whether there's any radio traffic to describe what may have been going on at that time. There's just been one report that they knew there was a hijacking, and they were citing radio traffic at that time. So this only adds to the horror that I think everyone is beginning to feel across this country today. Clearly. About what they try to imagine what has been going on. And it is just beginning, I suspect, for a lot of people to fully sink in about what we're going through. And we are just halfway through this day. And it's going to be a long week and many months to come as we continue to deal with this. So there's going to be a test of this country, and we're going to have to steel ourselves for some very difficult decisions
Clearly,
ahead.
this was a suicide mission of enormous magnitude, and of course we heard speculation from Pat Dawson at the scene that there might have even been a secondary bomb on board the aircraft, although who knows what kind of explosion would occur if a plane actually crashes in a building that's 110 stories high.
Is it too much to ask? Do we still have that identified? We're not going to do this in a gratuitous way, but to give you an idea of what happened, we have an astonishing piece of videotape of the second plane going into the World Trade Center, and you can see it coming from right to left across the screen. We'll try to play that for you in slow motion. There it is, first real time, and now let's just back it up for a moment and we'll play it in slow-mo so that you can see that in fact it was an airliner.
And when you saw the impact from a different angle, you saw the plane hit one side of the building and then you saw parts of the other side of the building blowing out. So you can only imagine how far that plane traveled through the building on impact. And keeping in mind that we want to talk about the location here. Southern tip of Manhattan, Newark Airport, probably what, Tom, as the crow flies, 10 miles
maybe
to the west and south. Kennedy Airport, another 10 miles maybe to the east. LaGuardia Airport, just to the east as well and slightly north. So air traffic, obviously, it's a congested area, although that was restricted airspace. No planes fly that close to New York City.
Landing gear at the bottom is somewhere in lower Manhattan. It was December 7th, 1941, actually the next day, that FDR said this is a day that shall live in infamy. We are living through another day of infamy for this country.
That was some videotape that was taken by our producer, our Dateline producer, Christian Martin, who was at the scene, Tom, right before that tower collapsed. I'm not sure if he was there before the first tower collapsed or the second tower. I believe it was the first tower. And as we saw, as you mentioned, airline debris, and apparently Christian saw some very grisly things on the scene.
Well, it turns out that President Bush has been diverted to Barksdale Air Force Base, which we believe is in Louisiana, and we expect to hear from him shortly. He has been taken to a secure area. There were reports that he would be taken back to Washington, to Andrews Air Force Base. We've been talking about the secure facilities that are available there to him in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Actually, the briefing room in the White House itself is secure, but they've decided to divert him, obviously, to an Air Force base, and he will be addressing the nation shortly. You have in your nation's capital now F-16s flying CAPs, they're called. These are air cover missions over the nation's capital after the plane went into the Pentagon today. So we have never been witness to anything quite like this in the United States within the continental borders of this country. An active war, nothing less than that. There is your nation's capital. It is effectively evacuated from the Capitol building itself down majestic Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. A crisis of grave proportions on this land, and the President of the United States in his first year in office will be addressing the nation, we're told, before too long.
And we would have to assume this would have been true, but a Navy public affairs spokesman now tells WUSA-TV that there are indeed dead inside the Pentagon. We want to go back to lower Manhattan. NBC's Pat Dawson is standing by there with more. Pat?
Matt, hundreds of people, we assume, hundreds of people based on the information that we've gotten from emergency officials here.
Back to local coverage for a moment now. The Milwaukee County Executive Tom Ament and Milwaukee County Sheriff Len Baldwin are having a news conference outside the courthouse. Let's listen to what Tom Ament has to say.
County Courthouse effective 11:30. I'd like to emphasize that as of now, there are no known threats anywhere within the metropolitan area. And we will obviously be monitoring that continuously. So to summarize, we have closed the courthouse for today. And we're obviously cooperating with all authorities. The airport, as you know, like all airports in the country, is essentially closed until further notice. All planes have been ordered to land, and to the best of my knowledge, almost all have. So.
What about other county workers, Executive Amen? Can you tell us about that? Anyone else affected besides the people at the courthouse?
No, they're continuing to work.
Pardon?
They're continuing to work.
What about other buildings?
Well, the thought is if there is any threat at all, it is to the courthouse and the courthouse complex.
Have you made any determination about tomorrow?
As of now, the facilities will be open. Obviously, that'll be monitored on a continuous basis, but as of now, they will be open.
In your history as county executive here, have you ever seen anything like this?
I don't think the nation has ever seen anything like it. There's never been an incident like this. Obviously, an incident of terrorism, and of course, I've never seen anything like it. It took place in New York and Washington. It's never happened in the history of this country. So,
what's going through the minds of county workers?
Well, I think what's going through their minds, going through all people's minds, is what happened, who caused it, what else is going to happen. There's all types of things going through people's minds: fear, anger, uncertainty, all the emotions, and that's what's going through everyone's mind.
Sheriff Baldwin, can you tell us what your people are doing right now? Are you at an increased level of alert as Chief Arthur Jones said his people are at?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been there since that happened this morning. We've got increased security at the airport area, and when you talked about Midwest Express, that means that area as well. We also had increased security in the Safety Building Courthouse complex, and I think it was a wise decision to close it down for today. I think it's also a wise decision, dependent upon what happens this afternoon, to determine what we need to do tomorrow. And I suspect that it probably, as the county executive said, it'll be open. We have officers working very closely with the Chief of Police from Milwaukee, as well as the Metropolitan Chiefs of Police and the federal agencies. We have some liaisons between our department and Arthur Jones's department, and we're in constant communication with them.
Do you have extra people on the street?
You bet we do.
Have you been able to account for all the planes in and out of Mitchell?
For all of the planes in and out, yes.
Everything that was supposed to be coming in, is everything accounted for?
Well, no, because some of them have been diverted. Many of the planes, after that second aircraft hit the tower, many of the planes that were possibly coming here were diverted to perhaps other airports, because they had, from what I understand, one or two other aircraft out there that they didn't know who they belonged to, or if they had been hijacked. So no, some of them were not. Pardon me?
I mean, are you tracking? I mean, if they were headed for Milwaukee, presumably Milwaukee people might have been involved. Have you been tracking where they were?
No.
Do you intend to?
It's my information that all planes except one are accounted for nationwide. Obviously, that all planes that are still in the air are being tracked, and if they come near any metropolitan area, there will be plenty of notice. They are being tracked by the federal authorities.
Can you tell us about the emergency management meeting this morning and what kinds of things you guys were trying to formulate?
Well, and this is my old emergency government days, we have a plan of action, if you will. However, in a situation like I've seen in New York, I indicated this to you earlier, that plan wouldn't go anywhere. I don't know what I would do if I were in that area. I just don't know how we would be able to handle it. You can plan for everything, and when you see something so devastating as this, somebody hearkened it to Pearl Harbor. I think it's worse. I think it's innocent civilians that have been killed, and it's far worse than Pearl Harbor. Attacking innocent people, and many of them friends and relatives of people that work in county government and people that live in Milwaukee. We know them. And it's just unbelievable that somebody would do an act like that.
Sheriff, it might be preliminary to ask this, but is there any plans to send rescue crews or emergency help to New York City or to Washington or to any of the areas that have been attacked?
Well, we were reacting this morning to try and take care of the people in Milwaukee, and we have already been talking to the Badger Sheriff's Association. It's a consortium of all the sheriffs in the state of Wisconsin to take a look at perhaps if they do need some help, that the possibility could exist that we could come out there and give them a hand. But
You know, they've got their hands full right now. We need to sit down with the county exec and other elected officials to determine whether or not they want us to go. I certainly believe that I'd have officers that would like to go.
Can you tell us any advice you have for people who are sitting at home watching the coverage, or what to do or not to do today?
Well, you know, it's ironic that today, 12 years ago, we cut over on 911. Please don't use 911 if you don't need it. The phone lines are jammed up as it is, and people are calling, asking questions that we don't have an answer to any more than you do. So and we're erring on the side of caution. Some people are going to be a little bit upset with law enforcement because we are afraid and we are worried about what might happen with terrorists here in Milwaukee. So if we jack some people up on occasion at the airport or maybe on the freeway or down, they need to understand and respect that law enforcement is strictly trying to save lives and protect the people.
Sheriff, addressing the 911 issue, one of the things the Chief of Police made clear today is your calls for...
That is Sheriff Lev Baldwin and Milwaukee County Executive Tom Amon holding a news conference to bring us up to date on what's being done in the Milwaukee area in light of today's terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and of course an airliner that also crashed outside Pittsburgh today. We heard the Milwaukee County Executive say that there are no known threats in the Milwaukee area at this time, and we heard the sheriff say that there is increased security, as you would expect, at the airport, also at the courthouse and safety building. Milwaukee County workers at the courthouse have been sent home. The courthouse is closed for the day. The same is true for the safety building. For tomorrow, it appears that the courthouse and safety building will be open. Other county workers are continuing to perform their duties today. Let's go to our Lenise Weeks now with some new information. Lenise?
Mike, as you know, I'm from New York, and as soon as I got word of the bombing over at the World Trade Center, I tried calling my family and friends, some of whom actually work in the building. For about 2 hours, my sister's boyfriend, who works near the building, could not locate his sister, who works in the building. Just moments ago, he found out that his sister's okay. Here's that conversation.
She's across the street in a building, you know, and she called the church, and the church called my mom, so I heard she's okay.
Now, she actually works in the World Trade Center.
She works in the World Trade Center on the 87th floor, I believe. She said that her arms are a little sore. She said that she never saw nothing like that before in her life, so it's kind of crazy down there. And even now, I'm in my van trying to get out of Manhattan. I can't even get out of Manhattan.
What's going on in Manhattan right now?
It's like a war zone. I mean, it's like a war zone out here. Everybody walking around dazed, you know, or, you know, can't get the paper on the street. It's like chaos out here. I mean, if you hear right now, listen. Hear this? Chaos out here. That was, that's the Red Cross going through. You see people in the streets crying, you know, people are like, you know, around cars have the radio. I mean, it's like a war zone. People are like around cars with the radios playing, listening to what's going on. It's crazy.
Mike, he says the worst part is that it's very hard to communicate with loved ones in New York to let them know, those that are okay, that they are okay, and that's very frightening for people right now.
Okay, Lenise, thanks a lot. Let's bring in Mike Santamoro again, who is sitting next to me today. Mike is the former local office of the FBI director from 1994 to 1998. Listen to what the sheriff had to say, listen to what the Milwaukee County executive had to say. Everything kind of going according to plan at this point?
Right, those are the plans that have been set up by, you know, most agencies over the years had established their own crisis management, crisis response plan. As I mentioned earlier, with Oklahoma City, World Trade Center, excuse me, other events like that and other events around the country, everybody realized that they had to make sure their plans were coordinated with other state agencies and federal agencies. So I'm sure those steps have been taken, coordination between the Sheriff's Department, Secret Service, FBI, the United States Marshal, in the case of the courthouse here locally.
Who ultimately makes decisions, Mike, as this thing continues to evolve? Who makes the decisions of whether, for example, the courthouse and the safety building open again or the airport opens again? Who makes those decisions?
I would say as far as the airport's concerned, probably FAA will make decisions as to whether planes fly, and once planes start to fly again, then airports can start to make their own local decisions. As far as federal buildings, primarily the agencies responsible, the courthouse generally under the U.S. Attorney or the Chief Judge, and each agency will start to make its own decisions as to how to open up and get back in business. But I presume that, notwithstanding any other incidents, that things will try to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Let me jump forward here and talk about the investigation of what has occurred today as a man who spent many, many years in law enforcement and as a man who has some experience at least dealing with the Oklahoma City terrorist bombing and what happened at the Olympics in Atlanta. What is step one? You're looking, this is not your typical terrorist attack.
Well, what comes to me, what comes first to mind is you don't have evidence in the forensic sense, where in Oklahoma City, World Trade Center, other events, you had forensic evidence, you have residue from the bomb, what the bomb was made up of, and the like. Witnesses on the ground say, hey, a truck drove up. I mean, the nation saw the plane fly into it. But the plane itself was not a bomb unto itself, specially made. It was just, it caused the event. So you lose that type of forensic evidence. On the other hand, as was mentioned earlier on one of the network coverages, the idea of who was on the plane, the plane list, whether they're aliases, the identifications used, when the tickets were purchased, that type of effort will start to take place, and I'm sure has taken place already, not only locally, say in the Boston area, Newark area, or D.C. area, wherever those planes came from, but also on an international basis. Who are these folks? And looking at groups who have the potential to do something this sophisticated, this coordinated. There are the international groups who have the ability to do this.
Mike Santamoro, again, thanks for your time. We'll continue to check with you throughout the day. What we're going to do now is remind you again that we are continuing to monitor CNN, NBC, but right now we're going to throw it back to MSNBC, and when anything else happens locally, we'll be here with that.
And that adds yet another dimension to what we're covering here today, that these hijackers were perhaps, some would say, were likely trained commercial airline pilots, and flying aircraft the size we're talking about today is not a skill possessed by every person walking around the face of the earth. These are the aircraft we're talking about today. The enormity of this just occurring to every American, all of us. No one has the advantage here of having a leg up on just what this means. We're talking about any one of these stories would be a complete disaster on any day when isolated. They have all happened on the same day. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to LAX. American Airlines Flight 77, Dulles to LAX. United Airlines Flight 175, Boston, LAX. That's the flight we've been watching. United Airlines Flight 93, Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. We have a commercial airliner down in a small airport outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. An earlier report that an aircraft had crashed into Camp David has now been put down. This is a picture of the wreckage near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We also cannot forget that the most crushing human drama is taking place at this hour in the city of New York, where I think it can be said conservatively that the number of deaths will end up in the hundreds and thousands. The New York City mayor has indicated so much in his comments. Our own Monica Novotny is at St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village, where they are getting a huge share of the casualties in this. Monica, what can you tell us?
Well, Brian, St. Vincent's Hospital is one of the two main trauma centers in the area where victims are being taken. A spokesman came out just a few moments ago. These are the numbers that he gave us so far. 184 patients brought in. 10 of those are in critical condition. The good news is that all are alive, being for. However, among them, many firefighters, NYPD, one EMT worker. This also, I should point out, was a few minutes ago, and I have to say that the stream of ambulances has been steady, so I can safely say that that number is certainly well over 200 at this point. The injuries range, they say, from minor smoke inhalation to more serious debris inhalation. Also, they're seeing burns, broken bones, shock, and multiple traumas. 3 of the victims who had come in so far had coronary difficulty. We also want to tell you about the scene just outside the hospital. I've spent the morning here, and I can tell you that they have had dozens of hospital workers lining the front entrance of the hospital, which is about a block long, and they have been there all morning waiting with stretchers and wheelchairs. Now, at this point, they seem to have run out of most of that equipment, so they've actually brought down office chairs that they're just draping in white sheets to carry the victims back into the hospital as they come out of those ambulances. The ambulances are in unbelievable condition themselves. You can just imagine what the scene must look like down at the World Trade Center, because as those ambulances come in, they are completely covered, some in an inch of dust. On top, the firefighters and the emergency workers themselves are completely covered in soot. They are certainly the heroes here. Many of them we see drop off the boat. They look exhausted themselves already, but they continue to get back in and roll out to continue the work. We also want to tell you they are stressing the need for blood throughout New York City. Many people spent the morning coming down here because they heard about St. Vincent's through the media. There are, in fact, hundreds of New Yorkers online. They have now set up makeshift signs actually designating blood types around the block, and folks are standing in packs on lines there based on their blood type. But at this point, obviously, the trauma center is so focused on the victims that they can no longer take any more blood, although they say they are desperate for it. So New York City is trying to arrange buses to actually carry these people to other facilities so that they can donate that blood. But they do continue to ask people in the area to come and donate blood to whatever the nearest facility is to them. Also, they're asking doctors in the area who are off duty at this point to stay off duty, and they want them to call in or volunteer.
Again, we're continuing to monitor live coverage of today's terrorist attacks in the United States, but as we do that, we're going to check in with Mike Jacobs, who has information on what military reserve units in the Milwaukee area do of what has occurred today. Mike?
And Mike, as you might well imagine, security is at a very high level out of the 440th Airlift Wing. That is just off of College Avenue. That's the place where President Bush always flies in when he is in Milwaukee, as he was just last month. We are told out there that they are at their highest level of security, not because of any threat, but because of precautionary measures. As you take a look at our tower cam from the airport, we are told that there are officers, security personnel carrying M16s who are at the entryway just off of College Avenue. And in fact, we have been told that there are security personnel with machine guns up on top of one of the buildings at the 440th Airlift Wing that is out at Mitchell International. So heightened security until things settle down at the 440th Airlift Wing at Mitchell. Mike?
All right, Mike, thanks a lot. Again, we'll continue to pop in and out here with updates on what is happening locally. Right now, let's go back to coverage from MSNBC.
Center has more telephone exchanges inside it than the city of Detroit has, period. It is a small city unto itself, as we all learned back in 1993 during the first act of terrorism to strike those two structures. It was a seminal moment in American history. There were comparisons then to Pearl Harbor. There were comparisons following the Oklahoma City bombing to Pearl Harbor, an act of domestic terrorism. The United States has never seen, the United States has never been forced to react to what has happened today. We have perhaps thousands of dead in New York. We now know there are people who have been killed inside.
Again, we're monitoring coverage from a variety of sources today of what has transpired in America. We're now going to join NBC because they have new information about a plane that went down outside Pittsburgh this morning.
In short, and you really can't put this story into short form, this has been perhaps the most devastating day in American history in terms of terrorism. It certainly has been. 4 separate attacks, obviously coordinated fairly thoroughly. 2 on the World Trade Center here in New York, 1 on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., a 4th, the hijacking and crash of a plane, as you just saw, outside Pittsburgh. Unclear now as to how many lives have been lost, but the numbers are bound to be staggering as the day progresses.
Aboard those airplanes, 266 people have lost their lives. That was confirmed by both United and American Airlines, and we are unclear, as Matt just said, about the perhaps thousands of people who have been killed and certainly injured as a result of what happened in New York City and outside Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. With more, here's Tom.
This is an NBC News special report. Here is Tom Brokaw.
September 11th, the year 2001, a day unlike any other in the long course of American history, a terrorist act of war against this country. President Bush saying today that freedom has been attacked by a faceless coward and freedom will be defended. Not since Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, 1941, has this country undergone such a devastating and damaging attack. And it may not yet be over. We do know at this time that at least 4 targets have been attacked. The 2 Twin Trade Tower centers here in New York City, the Pentagon, and then another plane that was crashed deliberately into an area outside of Pittsburgh. That is the 2nd plane hitting the Twin Trade Towers this morning, all of them hijacked airliners. Then these 2 colossal icons of the American capitalist system collapsed in lower Manhattan. The death toll at this hour is unknown, but it is expected to be, as Mayor Giuliani has said, horrendous. Shortly after those attacks on the Twin Trade Towers in New York City, at the Pentagon, in one of the outer rings, another hijacked airliner crashed into two areas there, killing an untold number of U.S. military personnel in Washington, D.C. A code red was put in effect in the nation's capital. The White House, State Department, CIA evacuated along with the Pentagon. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was evacuated to a secure area. President Bush, who was in Florida for an appearance for an education project, was evacuated to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where we do expect to hear from him before too long. The United States is in effect in a national state of emergency. All domestic flights were grounded immediately. Most flights that were already in the air, we believe, arrived safely at their destinations. The borders between the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico have been closed. Transatlantic flights were diverted to Canada. U.S. military forces in this country and around the world have been put on the highest possible alert. Aircraft carriers were moved to waters off New York City as this scene played out in the nerve center of this country, lower Manhattan, the financial markets, an area that is home to literally hundreds of thousands of people. They are still dealing with the carnage in lower Manhattan. We want to go now to NBC's David Bloom, who is in Midtown Manhattan, overlooking all of this. As you can see there, communications have been severely interrupted. David?
Well, Tom, what we're looking at behind us more than 4 hours after the first explosion is the smoking hulk of the essentially vanished World Trade Center. As you've said, the essential question at this hour in New York City is how many people may have died in these attacks. The various officials here in New York City believe that the casualty estimates will essentially go into the thousands and thousands of people. Here is the sequence of events as they happened at this hour. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses, and unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses, rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. So again, Tom, 4 hijacked airplanes. We know what happened to each of the 4. Other officials investigating now, both apparently the worst terrorist attack in the mainland United States ever. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. What we don't know is who may be responsible for these attacks. There's a lot of speculation, obviously, about Osama bin Laden, who is a Saudi dissident who is believed to be harbored somewhere in Afghanistan, but no one is claiming responsibility. In the West Bank, however, the Palestinians in the streets are cheering and celebrating these attacks on the United States, even though Palestinian leaders have condemned the attacks. We want to go now to NBC's Pat Dawson, who is down near the World Trade Center, because the big question, obviously, in New York City and across this country, how many people have been able to survive this horrendous attack? Pat?
Tom, right now, hundreds of rescue workers are massed here on the southern tip of New York and Manhattan Island, waiting for a possibility where they can go back in large numbers to begin searching through the debris. Obviously, the first task at hand will be to find anyone who is still alive in there. There really is no precedent for this. Two 110-story buildings. First of all, the impact of those two planes into them, and then the buildings themselves literally tumbling down into the streets. It's the sort of thing that one assumes very few people could have survived. But the task of those rescue workers, and if you look behind me, you can see many of them massed down there. The task will be for them to go back in and to try to find anyone who is alive. First of all, that is, of course, the priority. They know. We have spoken to a number of them. Of course, common sense tells us as well they are going to find a very, very high number of dead bodies in there as well. No way. We have spoken to officials here with the police department and with fire. They all say the same thing. This kind of a catastrophe, there's no way of knowing how many people that they're going to find in there. People are dead, how many people are alive. There's really no way to know how difficult their task is going to be going in there and trying to dig through the remains of two 110-story buildings that are now lying at the bottom of Manhattan. Obviously, taking care of those that are hurt, that they have been able to get out, is a first priority. There are literally, I would say, probably a mile-long line of ambulances and rescue vehicles along this stretch of the West Side Highway in the lower part of Manhattan. Just on the right here is a community college in New York. That college is the triage center for those they've been able to take out. But I can tell you at this point that at least from this vantage point where we have seen most people going in and out, there have been, relatively speaking, very few ambulances going out of here in the last 3 to 4 hours. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, Pat Dawson. One of my colleagues who is right in the middle of the collapse of those buildings is CNBC's Ron Insana, who went down with a cameraman hoping to get close to the World Trade Center, and then it began to come down, the first one. Ron, take us through what you experienced.
Well, Tom, much of the area had been, in fact, cordoned off, and the cameraman from MSNBC and I were trying to get across to the west side of the World Trade Center in order to hook up with the rest of the NBC crews that we knew were there. As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion. We turned and immediately ran for cover in the other direction as debris began to rain down. As we made our way, John going straight down the street, I taking a right turn around a corner, it got increasingly dark. The skies blackened as the material just continued to rain down. I hid briefly behind a car, and as the material got thicker and thicker and it became increasingly difficult to breathe, I got inside a parked car, a random parked car, and hid there basically until the material stopped falling. It was pitch black, black as night inside that car, and for several minutes I remained there until some flickers of light were able to be seen. I made my way to a building and joined some police officers who were inside, and as the blackness began to lift and this gray, thick smoke clung in the air, we were able to find a police car and make our way out of the area. The policeman stopping along the way to pick up 2 injured people and leave them at a Midtown hospital, and subsequently made my way here.
What about collateral damage to other buildings? Those, of course, are the classic canyons of lower Manhattan, and as that building came down, it did create a kind of tornadic wind that went through there.
Absolutely. Much like the images that were created for the movie Independence Day, when New York was exploding, the corridors of lower Manhattan are so narrow and channel so much wind, even just on a plain windy day, that this material blew through in a way that was really unimaginable. It was truly frightening. It continued to rain down for several minutes, as you can see there, and the winds just whipped through these corridors for several minutes, eventually calming down to such an extent where there was just a thick gray haze throughout the entire area, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, CNBC's Ron Insana, who was right in the middle of it all today. New York City effectively has been shut down. All tunnels in and out of the city have been closed for security reasons. The airports are closed. The subways are closed. Traffic has been removed from the streets. All hospitals are on extra alert. One right kind of in the middle of it all at Ground Zero is St. Vincent's Hospital. And NBC's Robert Bazell is there, as he has been all morning. Robert,
I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
George W. Bush speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base, a secure location near Shreveport, Louisiana. And he is trying to reassure Americans that their government is up and running, that they themselves will be safe, and he called what happened today an act of cowardice. These are the times when presidents are tested, make no doubt about it. This is the largest crisis that any American president has had to deal with since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, obviously, and this will be a time when Americans will make a very firm, gut-level decision during this day, into tonight, and on into tomorrow and the days that come, as to the capability of President George W. Bush, as he will receive the support of the American people, almost reflexively rallying around the chief executive, as has been the case anytime tragedy has struck the United States. Tragedy has not struck this country like this since Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Let's listen now to some of those who witnessed what happened today in New York.
I heard a very low plane, which usually does happen, but when I looked up, it was like I was actually gliding with it, and I saw it actually went straight into one of the Twin Towers. It was like it sunk right into the floor. It disintegrated instantly.
Can you tell us what kind of an airplane it was?
It looked like a huge 747. It was a big airline. It wasn't a small jet. It was a big carrier.
And you couldn't see anybody? Could you see a pilot or any such thing?
No, I actually was. It was like side by side. It was like I was right behind it. It was huge. I couldn't believe how low it was. I was telling my roommate, this plane is very low, and I actually saw it go straight into the Twin Towers. Like, why is he going into the building?
Also, as Commander-in-Chief, as U.S. military forces around the world are on the highest possible alert, there is so much uncertainty in this situation. Who is responsible? When it could happen again? And where? These are questions that are still unresolved as we try to work our way through this day. I'm joined on the telephone now by the former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, a longtime veteran of national security matters in this country. Mr. Berger, in all of your contingency planning during your days in the White House, did you ever anticipate something like this, 4 hijacked airliners that would be driven into the Twin Trade Towers and the Pentagon?
Well, Tom, I think for some time we have known that terrorism is the greatest security threat that this country faced. We've seen some horrible incidents here before. We broke up a multi-pronged effort on Millennium Weekend, but this certainly goes beyond anything that we have seen before in its dimensions and sophistication.
As we work our way through this day of shock and grief and still trying to count the number of casualties, we also have to say, however, that there has been a stunning failure of intelligence at the highest possible level. The American people are going to wonder why they spent billions of dollars of intelligence if we can't find out about a complex operation like this that involves so many people.
Well, I think all of that is going to have to be sifted out. I think that in the midst of our outrage and anger, President Bush is right. We have to show the world that we will respond to this both with determination and with steadiness. That means first, obviously, focusing on security and on rescue, then on determining who's responsible. And this is of such magnitude that it's inconceivable to me that we will not soon know what the origin of this is. And then how we did not detect this, since it obviously involved a multiple operation based on from the United States. But blame, I think, the blame game, I think, comes, in my judgment, after we do everything we can to take care of the people who are in those buildings. We assure the security of others who may be in situations that are vulnerable, and we find out who is responsible for this absolutely horrifying set of events.
Mr. Berger, it's just not a matter of assigning blame. That's not the question. The question is, how do we get our intelligence back on track so it doesn't happen in the next 20 minutes or the next 20 hours?
Well, I think we have to recognize that this is the overwhelming security threat to the nation, more so than any foreign nation, more so than long-range missiles. Terrorism has been and continues to be the #1 threat to our people. I think the intelligence community has intensified its efforts over the years, but this simply demonstrates that we're certainly not doing enough.
Sandy Berger, thank you very much for being with us today on what is obviously a day of great trial for this country, a great tragedy, and we have to determine how we go from here once we do begin to sort out just how many lives were lost, who is responsible for all of this, and how we can protect ourselves from this kind of attack again in the future as it continues to play out across America. Robert Knowles is on the phone with us now. He was on the 54th floor, I'm told, of one of the World Trade Center buildings when one of the planes was flown into it. Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home?
Yes, sir.
Could you turn down your television? I can hear it in the background, and that will cause us some problems if we continue our discussion. Okay. Tell me exactly where you were and what happened to you.
I was on the 54th floor.
Of #1 building or #2?
#1 building.
And when were you first aware of the attack?
Well, something hit the building, and it knocked me to the floor. And then the whole window blew out of the office I was in. And it snatched the desk out of the office like it was a piece of paper.
And how did you get out of that office?
By the grace of God, I was holding on to the door so I wouldn't be sucked out the window.
And then did you go down the stairs?
Yeah, going down the stairs was really rough because it was from the 30th floor down, it was water. The sprinklers was on. And then I pray to God for the people in the wheelchairs because they couldn't get out. They were sitting there waiting for somebody to carry them down.
How many people did you see like that, Mr. Knowles?
2 people. They were invalids. You know, they couldn't get out the wheelchairs. It wasn't a regular wheelchair. It was the kind of wheelchair where they do everything in a wheelchair.
It was a mechanical wheelchair of some kind?
Yes, sir.
And then as you made your way to the bottom of that stairwell, was crowded with other people trying to get out?
Yes, sir, but God bless the fact that it happened early. Because if it had happened at 10:30, it would have been chaos because you couldn't get down the stairs. Between the smoke and the lights being out in the water, and the staircase was slippery.
When you finally got to the ground floor, then what happened?
Then they herded us out of the building. They told us to walk fast. We walked up towards Broadway, up Nassau, and it was glass blown from everywhere.
When you were in your office when the first explosion occurred, that was the first building that was hit?
Yes, sir.
And were there lots of people in the building at that hour?
It was a good amount of people, but not lots.
It was not full to capacity?
No, thank God.
And were there other people who, so far as you could tell, were either seriously hurt or killed in the first explosion that you could find?
No, everybody I seen was mobile. They were able to get out the building. You know, people were coughing, people fell on the stairs. They weren't hurt from the explosion. They were hurt trying to get out of the building.
Okay, Mr. Knowles, we wish you the very best, and by the grace of God, you were able to get out of there, and we know that this has been a difficult time for you, but we thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Washington now. Senator John McCain, who has declared this an act of war on the United States. It's already being described as a kind of 21st century Pearl Harbor. Senator McCain.
I think that's accurate in many respects, Tom, although clearly the implications of this are very significant, and including the fact that at least we knew exactly who it was that took these actions against the United States at Pearl Harbor. And obviously at this point we don't know who it was or which organization or nation may have been sponsoring this kind of activity.
We're obviously in the early stages dealing still with the shock and the grief, trying to count the number of casualties, but this country will have to take immediate action in terms of how we rearrange ourselves now to hope that we don't happen again. We're going to have some profound changes in America, Senator.
I'm afraid so. I think that our lifestyles will not be the same for a very long period of time because of security requirements. I also think that, as I was watching you earlier, there is going to have to be an evaluation about our intelligence capability, and part of that evaluation will be recognition that we don't have the kind of human intelligence capabilities that perhaps we need. We have excellent technical capabilities, but a lot of times you have to have someone on the ground to penetrate these organizations so you can know their intentions rather than their actions. But look, this is a terrible, unspeakable act. I believe the American people will rally behind and support the President of the United States, and I believe that we will find out who did this, and I think we will respond. And I don't know how you could describe it, very frankly, any other way but an act of war.
You grew up in the conventional military, and we have such an investment in all of that, but for some time, national security officials across all administrations have been saying the great threat to this country is terrorism. Have we devoted enough attention to this kind of an act?
It's very difficult for me to second guess. I think there's going to be plenty of that kind of activity. I would repeat that when I talk to people in the field and when I travel around the world, our lack of human intelligence capability, part of that is the difficulty in penetrating some of these organizations. As you know, they're very difficult, but that may be an area that would have to be addressed. Our technical capabilities, our satellites and others are absolutely superb and sometimes phenomenal. But you've got to divine people's motives. As I said, you've got to get these things before the act is being carried out, and that's probably an area that we have to look at. But I'm sure that this administration and the Congress will devote all their efforts to making sure not only that the people who perpetrated it are punished, but also that it never happens again.
Senator, is it too early to speculate on whether or not we're going to need protective air cover over the nation's capital in some of our more critical areas?
I don't know. I do know that average citizens are going to find it a much more complicated going to an airport and getting onto an airplane. That'll be one of the first, obviously, one of the first and necessary evaluations that are needed, because I think it's pretty clear now that these planes were hijacked, and how they were able to do that in the case of at least 4 airplanes is going to be a subject of great interest and perhaps some controversy, because there's been this issue of security at airports for a long period of time. How much inconvenience versus how much security, which has been one debate that's been in Congress and in other areas of government as well. So I think that rather than attacking it from having air cover over the Capitol, perhaps we ought to devote our efforts to going places where these acts of terror originate. That would probably be much more effective and cost-effective as well.
Senator, we're still dealing, as I say, with the initial stages of shock, but in fact, it is hard to overstate the magnitude of all of this or the continuing effect that it will have on the business of this nation.
Well, I don't. There's never been anything like this in our lifetime. Pearl Harbor was a horrible and dastardly deed, and I don't like to compare it to Pearl Harbor. But this is unprecedented in its scope and frankly, its efficiency.
Senator John McCain, thank you very much for being with
Thank
us
you,
today.
Tom.
Thank you. Under these very difficult circumstances. It's also worth pointing out that in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attack on a military installation. This was an attack by terrorists using innocent American civilians, for the most part, in hijacked airliners directed at targets filled with civilians, with the exception of the Pentagon, obviously. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now for an update. 4 planes hijacked today, Bob. 2 United, 2 American. Bring us up to date.
With a total toll just in the airplanes, so thousands dead presumably on the ground, but just in the airplanes, 266 dead. As you said, 2 American planes, 2 United planes. 2 of those planes were taking off from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. 2 went into the World Trade Center buildings, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania with no idea where that one was being hijacked to. At last report, and this report was about 40 minutes ago, there were now only 50 planes left in the air, 50 commercial flights over domestic U.S. airspace. That is saying no new flights were being allowed to take off, haven't since 9:30 Eastern Time this morning. The planes that were already in the air were allowed to continue on. There were only 50 of those still in the air. They were mostly about 20 minutes away from airports, so presumably almost all of those should have landed by now. There were also 22 international flights still in the air, heading here. Initially, the word was they were going to be diverted to Canada, and then the decision was made that that would be just too hard for Canadians to handle, and so those 22 flights were going to be allowed to land in the U.S. So far, we don't know of any of them landing. But this is a very important point. The FAA knew of no problems with any of those 50 planes still in the air in the U.S. or 22 in international airspace bound here. So that would seem to indicate that the problems are over in terms of these hijackings. Just to run the flights down very quickly, the first was an American airliner, Boston to Los Angeles. There were 92 killed on board that one. It went into the World Trade Center. That was the first event. Then there was a United plane leaving from Boston. 65 were killed on it. It also went into the World Trade Center. It, too, as the American plane before it, was supposed to have been bound Boston to Los Angeles. Then there was an American airliner leaving from Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles, 64 aboard, and it crashed into the Pentagon. And finally, a United flight leaving Newark Airport bound for San Francisco. It went into rural Pennsylvania, so we don't know what its intended target was. Now, in terms of what Senator McCain was talking about, when you think of a plane being hijacked, you've got to get the hijackers aboard, and you have to get some sort of deathly weapon aboard, like a gun or some explosives. And there are 2 ways to do that. Either they go through passenger screening and manage to sneak through passenger screening without getting caught, or you get behind the doors somehow and sneak those people aboard behind passenger screening as though they were an airport employee. There have been investigations done on both those things. The FAA tests them a lot with plainclothes people to see if they get through, and every time they do it, a sizable percentage do get through passenger screening with mock weapons or mock explosives. And the same thing on the employees behind the lines. A sizable number do manage to get through the doors. So we'll be seeing in coming days what it was that led to all of this. Tom?
Bob, any indication from the FAA of radio traffic indicating that there was a hijack underway?
No, what it is in the cockpit, presuming that an armed person, in the course of a hijacking, an armed person or somebody with explosives has broken into the cockpit, and the pilot, therefore, cannot say it over the open radio because the hijacker would take action against the pilot. So there's a button that you push, and the button sends out a code, and it tells the appropriate air traffic controllers, and word is flashed to Washington immediately that there's a hijacking in progress. So one could presume that that happened in all 4 of these flights. Of course, we don't know at the moment, but it certainly must have. Then you wonder, too, because the targets were hit so precisely, is that somebody standing behind a pilot and saying, okay, now fly this right into a World Trade Center tower? Or is it an experienced pilot, the hijacker himself, who gets the pilot out of his seat and takes over at the controls to guide it in at the last minute? We don't know, of course.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Robert Hager, who will be monitoring the airline part of all of this. The 4 hijacked airliners, in effect, became guided missiles in the hands of terrorists who hijacked the plane. They took innocent people to death with them, 266 altogether. President Bush is at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana at this time. We're told other senior members of the Bush administration are in secure positions. There's code red at the Capitol right now. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was removed to a secure position. All financial markets have been closed down. All national monuments have been evacuated across America in places like Minneapolis, Kentucky, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. A number of critical installations have been closed down as well. This country, the most powerful in the world, has been, in effect, semi-immobilized today by these terrorist attacks. And we can only hope that they are now all over with. When we heard this morning at 8:42 that the World Trade Center had been attacked, we thought that that was a solitary and horrifying event. Not too long after that, the second one was hit. And then NBC's Jim Miklashevsky here on NBC said an explosion was felt at the Pentagon. And that was a plane that went into the Pentagon, another airliner near the Hillip pad there. It fortunately was on the far side of the building from the most critical offices housing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Intelligence Center, and of course Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who at first did not want to evacuate the building, and then he was persuaded that it was in the best national interest of this country to do just that. And then, of course, we had the situation in Pennsylvania where a United airliner crashed into the ground. It, too, had been hijacked. James Lee Witt is the former head of the Federal Emergency Administration in the Clinton administration. He was well known during his tenure there because there were so many natural disasters around the country. Mr. Witt, what is FEMA doing at this hour?
Well, Tom, I'm sure that they've already activated the Operations Center and also talking to the City of New York Emergency Management and Governor Pataki's office in putting together whatever resources they can to support their efforts in meeting that immediate need. And I'm sure they're probably activating some search and rescue teams. Probably. Go ahead.
I know, James, from our own experiences together that you had lots of contingency plans for tornadoes and for hurricanes, those kinds of natural disasters. What did you have in planning at FEMA for a terrorist attack?
Well, of course, you know, after the Oklahoma City bombing, Tom, we've worked very hard in putting together a very strong federal response plan in which they have continued to work on, particularly adding the terrorist component to that, and working with the FBI, who will have the lead on this in crisis management. And, of course, FEMA has a consequence management, and I'm sure Director Albaugh and all the staff there are liaisoning with the FBI at this time.
Was that something that you prepared on your own, or did you do that in close coordination and get regular updates from the FBI?
We worked very closely with the FBI, and if there was a threat, then they would notify us and work very closely with them, and even as far as having someone in their operations center.
When you look at those pictures of what happened in lower Manhattan, in the canyons of this great city with those two 110-story buildings coming down, you can only imagine what the carnage must be on the ground.
It's probably horrifying, and I saw earlier said it looked like a war zone, and I'm sure it does, and just looking at the pictures. But, you know, there's so many firefighters and police officers that were probably up at the base of that building, probably in that building, trying to get people out, and I'm sure that, you know, the loss is going to be tremendous, and the pain is going to be felt for a long, long time.
Jamie Lee Witt, thank you very much. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement on Tuesday said that Osama bin Laden, they are closely allied with him, was not responsible for the attacks on the United States. What happened in the United States, according to the Taliban, was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this kind of work. Neither can we, a Taliban spokesman said from the southern city of Kandahar. The Taliban, of course, a very militant and very conservative Islamic organization and widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, a very wealthy Saudi dissident who has a very sophisticated apparatus at his disposal. He has not been seen for some time, although he does appear from time to time on some Islamic media outlets. One A reporter who has been in touch with him said that 3 weeks ago he said an attack was planned on the United States, but that, of course, has not yet been verified. He is, at the moment, I think fair to say, at the top of everyone's list of suspects. But as we have learned on these occasions in times past, it's often not the best thing to do to make a premature judgment. There is the picture that we have often seen of him as he has declared a holy war against the United States. Let's go to General Norman Schwarzkopf now, who had the Southern Command and, of course, commanded the forces during the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, I've been trying to review in my own mind the incidents in which the United States has been a conspicuous participant or absent in the past month or so. We lost a spy plane over southern Iraq. We've stepped up pressure on southern Iraq. Obviously, in the Middle East, in the ongoing dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis, there's a great feeling that the United States is siding only with the Israelis. The war in Sudan goes on, but we've not taken an active role there. Are there any other signs on your radar screen that would indicate that this kind of thing was likely to happen?
Well, you know, Tom, the truth of the matter is that most of the Middle East countries consider the United States to be, you know, the main source of support for Israel. It isn't isolated just in certain states. And, you know, any one of those people, if you got them aside and asked them truthfully, they would tell you that they were not in favor of our policies with regard to Israel.
So do you think that that probably was the cause of all this continual escalation that has been going on between Palestine and Israel? And there's been an absence of participation, I think that it's fair to say, on the part of this administration and all of that.
Well, I think that's kind of speculation at this time. I certainly think that you know, the reason why the United States is hated in so many places in the Middle East is with regard to the support of the state of Israel. And as a matter of fact, they'll openly state that if Israel had not had the support of the United States, it wouldn't exist today. So they go so far as to say that.
There are people, many people, still trapped.
When you and I were talking earlier, we were commenting on the sophistication of this attack and the complexity of that. Doesn't that stun you some?
It really does. I mean, just what was mentioned by, you know, by Robert Hager, the fact that undoubtedly, you know, I can't see any U.S. commercial airline pilot flying their plane directly into an obstacle like that. Undoubtedly, there was, you know, somebody at the controls that was able to guide the plane there. That in itself is kind of scary. I told you earlier about the fact that it bothers me that with all the devices we have against hijackers, that hijacking can still take place on this scale and organized in that fashion. That causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, you know, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies, and good guys don't need spies, and we put satellites in the air, and we put a huge amount of investment into technical intelligence. At the same time, we dismantled human intelligence. I don't know what the status of that is today, but we damn sure need to get somebody inside these organizations. I would tell you that...
General, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because we're looking at some scenes that we have not yet had an opportunity to see. It does look like a nuclear winter in lower Manhattan. It is one of the most vital areas anywhere in the world, obviously. The home of the financial markets, the World Trade Center, lots of residences. There's been a real revival down there in recent years, and it has a great gray pall of dust and smoke and debris. And of course, overlaying all of that is the psychological effect of knowing that there could be a casualty list in terms of fatalities that could go into the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, Pearl Harbor, we lost 2,400. And, you know, when you today, it's hard to believe that we're not going to greatly exceed that number.
And as I pointed out earlier, in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attacking a military installation. This was the use of innocent people in commercial airliners to attack other innocent people in New York. There was one military target, obviously the Pentagon. You can see, if you're looking at this with me, General, the extent of the damage in lower Manhattan.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And you know, it's the natural inclination is, okay, we got to hit somebody back. And in this case, what's going to, you know, be even more frustration to the national psyche is you can't hit back. You know, you don't, who you're going to hit at this stage of the game.
Yeah. Thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll ask you to stand by. We'll be coming back to you. This is, as effective as a bomb being dropped there. There were 2 bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those 2 buildings, and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion, there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists. Robert Harper was one of those who was in the area when all of this occurred. Mr. Harper?
Yes. Tom, how are you today?
Tell me where you were when the first plane flew into the first building.
I was down below the World Trade Centers. I was arriving at work just a little late, and the first plane had crashed into the building, so there were many people, sort of standing around. There were EMS workers running around as well, and you could see the second plane coming around and everyone sort of pointing up, and then that second plane just crashed into the building.
And what about people who were trying to get out of the building? We had one report of bodies falling through the air and people jumping from windows. Did you see any of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a very traumatic day, I think, having seen that, because where the initial explosion was, there was a lot of black smoke coming out of around, I believe it was around the 78th floor, and you saw people jumping for their lives out of the 78th floor of the World Trade Center. Smoke everywhere, fire everywhere, and people were continuing to jump out of the 78th floor. So people began to run away, because once the second explosion happened, the debris that was caused by that began to fall everywhere, and everybody just started running toward the mayor's office. I began to run toward the Woolworth building, which was close to that, and then as I got closer to that, I realized if the top of the World Trade Center hit the Woolworth building, too would be affected, and it might also fall down.
Did you have a sense right away that these buildings could come down?
Not initially. For about 15 minutes or so, people only thought, they couldn't really tell what had happened, and only after the second plane hit did people realize that, this is probably something that was orchestrated. And so then people initially who had, been trying to go back to the scene and try to help people realized that another plane had hit the building, and that's when people said, look, this can't have been a mistake.
Where are you now?
I'm outside of the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. I've just been released for smoke inhalation. I've been in the hospital there. They rushed me to the hospital, not too long after that, because the black soot and everything that was associated with the building, heavy black smoke engulfed the entire financial district. From 9 o'clock onward, and we were sitting on the side of the road. EMS workers were there administering oxygen to people, thinking that everything was okay. And then as they began to realize that the explosion might have caused so much trauma to both the World Trade Center that they would fall, then everybody just began to run because they saw that the building itself was actually going to fall. So all of the people that had gone to help out were then put in double danger, because you were then running, and the building literally came and fell over the entire financial district area. It was a complete nightmare. Black smoke everywhere. People were running toward the Brooklyn Bridge, running away from the mayor's office, afraid that the falling part of the World Trade Center would hit other buildings, and that would cause a topple effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, and thank God you're okay, and I hope that you'll be able to deal with all of this. We do appreciate
it's been a real mess, and I can't. Coming back in the ambulance, somebody said, one of the things that they remembered, thinking about is the date today is September 11th, so 9/11. So, it's something that can't really go without notice. Is that this was completely planned, completely orchestrated. Whoever did this has been planning this obviously for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Robert Harper, who was one of the survivors who was just a little bit late to work this morning, but then got caught in the devastating attack on the Twin Trade Towers. It's hard for me to overstate to people who are unfamiliar with New York just how dynamic that area is in terms of people coming and going. The 2 towers are 110 stories high, or they were. 20 to 50,000 people would work in them at any one time. It's blocks from the stock market and from many of the principal banks in America, to say nothing of residential areas. And we will not know for some time what the death toll is there, to say nothing of the number of people who have been injured, so many of them with burns. Let's go to Washington now, and NBC's Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert. Tim, give us the state of play in the nation's capital right now. We know that the White House and the State Department and CIA have been evacuated. Dennis Hastert has been removed. Where is Dick Cheney at this hour? Do we know?
Tom, he is in a secure location. They won't tell us exactly, but I do know that he is there with his top-level aides. We have heard from some of those people. He has been in constant communication with the President of the United States and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice. Tom, I've been speaking to people in the intelligence and law enforcement community, in and out, those who've served, those who are serving now. No one is the least bit surprised that there was a terrorist attack on the shores of America. Every person, to a man and woman, absolutely stunned, not only by the magnitude, but by the precision of this attack. They are absolutely convinced that there's only a few cells that could possibly have done this. And this is quite interesting because I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me. Every one of the 4 hijacked planes that Bob Hager talked to you about was bound for California. In the words of this high-ranking official, the bastards knew they all had a plane full of fuel for the maximum impact upon collision. There is, in my experience in Washington, unprecedented anger here, but no one knows how or where to channel it. Right now, the situation is a bit chaotic. Communication is difficult, but the Bush administration is underscoring that the president is in charge, in command, in constant communication, and will bring these people to justice. They just know it's going to take a long, long time.
Tim, it's also going to be a test of the political maturity, if you will, of Washington. It's a city that has been so riven by what many would describe as petty political disputes. But this is one nation on this day.
Suddenly, the Social Security lockbox seems so trivial, Tom. One official said to me, Tim, your life is going to change, but more important, your son's life is going to change forever. America will never be the same after September 11th, 2001. The levels of security, heightened tension, the way we look at each other, at our institutions, will in fact be altered. That will bring some gratitude, if you will, to the terrorists. And that's why we as a nation, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are, as they talk with one another today, are absolutely unified in their attempt to strike back, but also try to put salve on the national psyche so we don't become an armed camp resisting an enemy we really can't identify and never know when is striking.
Because the consequences psychologically for this country are every bit as great as they are physically for America as well. It is worth pointing out, I suppose, that we all breathed a great sigh of relief when the Cold War came to an end with the collapse of communism. And yet there was nothing as devastating as this for this country during that long, cold twilight that we faced down communism in Moscow with its considerable nuclear arsenal, which it still has in place, obviously.
You know, Tom, it's a very important point because all during this past few weeks, the debate about missile defense systems, many people were saying publicly, even those proponents or the detractors, well, you know, we're a long way from research on this, but there is a potential threat of a rogue nation launching a missile or an accidental launch from Russia or China modernizing their force. But everyone kept saying the true risk, the real risk is terrorist attack, and we plain don't know how to defend ourselves. But again, and let me underscore this, people are absolutely stunned, disbelieving that something so well coordinated, something is with a tick-tock like this, 4 hijackings within a matter of an hour, and then being able to take those very planes and drive them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And there is growing suspicion, Tom, here that the plane that landed, crashed in Pennsylvania, was most likely headed for the Capitol or White House. That's the operating theory of many of the people I've spoken to today.
Thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. The equation has changed for all of us, personally and professionally, in the course of the last several hours, and we'll be dealing with this for a long, long time. But first, we want to take you through the eyewitness accounts of people who were witness to what happened here on a very sunny early fall morning in New York today. Some of the eyewitnesses.
I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything like this. A lot of people died. Nothing this devastating.
We carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. There was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just crumbling.
Then there was the haunting story from an eyewitness that we heard from a few moments ago of people in wheelchairs who were unable to get out of the building as he ran down the stairs, and he was obviously overcome with emotion as he described that for us. We don't have any numbers for you. We're trying to be as circumspect as we can be All public officials are saying that they expect the final death toll to be horrendous. But this business of determining how many people are still in the rubble will take many, many hours, if not days, to determine. Here is a quick summary of what we have been through today in this country. On the 11th of September, the year 2001, at 8:42 this morning, first one plane that had been hijacked crashed into the World Trade Center. Then, not too long after that, a second plane. About an hour later, the Pentagon was attacked by a hijacked airliner, and then came word that another hijacked airliner had crashed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When we saw the first reports and witnessed, those of us who live in New York, of the World Trade Center being hit by an airplane, at first all of us thought, I'm sure, that it had to be some kind of a terrible accident. And then, when we heard that a second plane, and you could see it flown deliberately into the World Trade Center, the horror of this terrorist war began to unfold, and it continues to unfold here now almost 5 hours later. And we'll be continuing to cover this across America and in the nation's capital. NBC's Pat Dawson has been not too far from the World Trade Center throughout most of the day, where it has been chaotic and terrifying. Pat?
Tom, as you point out, we try not to exaggerate very much in this circumstance, and yet in many ways it's hard not to exaggerate just the things we have been seeing and the things that we have been told. I think it is fair to say that the task that now confronts rescue workers here is Herculean, a very, very difficult task, and it is of two parts. It has been about 3 hours since what we might call the last catastrophic incident in a morning of catastrophes. That is since the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which used to stand behind me just about 10 blocks south, right below there. It used to tower above the buildings, which you can see, and obviously it is no longer there, nor is the South Tower. 3.5 hours since that happened. There have been no catastrophic incidents since then, but it has affected the rescue effort clearly because they are afraid of what could happen, what still might happen, since there were a sequence of catastrophes, if you will. That has made the rescue very, very difficult. At this point, we are being told unofficially that there may be as many as 200 to 300 rescue workers who are actually down there. We have seen pictures of some of them. They are down around the base of this building. They are beginning the, again to use that word, Herculean task of trying to find the people who might be alive in that debris. We know that there are a great number of people who are dead in there, unquestionably. What they are hoping to find is survivors, and at this point they really can't speculate on how many there are, how many there could be, and I don't think it really serves us at this point to speculate on the numbers that it could be. One of the tasks, though, is to try to get this rescue effort in its entirety going, and as you can see behind me down here, there are probably hundreds of New York City and New York State and federal rescue people who are involved, fire, police, emergency service, quite a few. In addition to those, the task is certainly aided by the American Red Cross's disaster relief teams. They are here on the scene. This is Frank Donahue, who is with the American Red Cross. Frank, tell me first of all, as you start out here, what is it you're trying to do?
Well, our immediate purpose is to kind of assess what role the Red Cross can play initially, and certainly it's to help the emergency medical people that are here provide any kind of relief and support we can for them. People being evacuated from neighborhoods need a place to go, and the Red Cross is setting up service centers and shelters. There's one at Grand Central Station and Penn Station. And then the blood supply, making sure we have a safe blood supply, not only here but throughout the country.
Do you have any idea, have you heard, how many casualties have been dealt with so far?
No, I have not. I'm sorry, I have not heard that.
Is it, now part of your task, though, is also to provide blood supplies. Obviously, that will be needed in huge
Absolutely, and people throughout the country are responding. They should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It's important to know that this incident, and you know, there's blood needed here in Altoona, there's blood needed all throughout the country that's been affected by this disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Another part is people that are moving around, are traveling. No airport in this country is open, and so Red Cross volunteers are in every airport providing assistance to families.